So there's evidence of sheep everywhere, bits of little fluffy wool. I even found wool inside the church. You find their droppings, you hear the bleating, and you can see the herds grazing. And, this church was probably built due to the wealth from the wool trade. And I love how it's like the sheep seem to know it. Like they had a part in building it, and they are completely comfortable rubbing along the stone walls and resting against the tombstones. The sheep are certainly at home in this place that they helped build.
Welcome to the Champing Podcast. You may be thinking, and what sort of word is that? To which I answer, it is a combination of the words church and camping, and it amuses me no end. Champing is a unique concept of camping overnight in historic churches brought to the world by the Churches Conservation Trust, the national charity protecting redundant churches. Over 10,000 of happy champers have stayed in their churches that are dotted all over England, so in this podcast series, we embark on our very own sleepover, but with a twist. Each week, I invite a new sleepover guest to join me, Victoria Jenner, to spend a night within ancient walls. Together, we explore the secrets of a new church and the mysteries it inspires. This week, I invite you to explore a church that has refused to die, quite literally. Wolfhampcote stands on the edge of Warwickshire, but its past is only visible in the few buildings and ruins that remain. In this episode, I am joined by author Matthew Green as we set out to uncover the secrets of this forgotten village. We are met with a conflicting landscape, one that still exists, yet almost feels lost in time. Join us as we embark on this journey of discovery amongst the Shadowlands as we search for answers around Wolfhampcote's mysterious past. Let's travel back to a deserted medieval village.
Hiya.
Oh, hello, Alex. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, yeah.
Great. How are you?
I'm very well. Yeah, very well.
I am talking to one of England's best-known farmers, Dr. Alex Langlands, a regular on our TV screens due to his passion for historic farming, wildlife, and the wonderful British countryside. You may know him for the show Victorian Farm and its sequels.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting period, really, because on the one hand, as you say, we've got the kind of mythological Black Death that comes along and creates all of these deserted medieval villages, or DMVs, as we like to call them as archaeologists. And you can always rely on archaeologists to turn something really quite interesting and exciting into a very dry acronym. But the DMVs, deserted medieval villages, I think the Black Death did have an effect. It did have an effect, but it also came along at a time of change, social change, but also climatic change as well in Britain. There'd been in the sort of century of crisis, as we call it, the 14th century, right at the beginning of the century, there'd been a sort of series of really, really poor harvests and lots of starvation and hunger. And that in some ways had sort of undermined the health of a whole generation. So when the Black Death came along, it had a real sort of profound effect on numbers. But I don't think, things changed overnight, as you say. I think probably in some places they did. But actually, we tend to think more in terms of long-term settlement shift. Again, not as attractive as complete desertion, the kind of Mary Celeste of the of the medieval world. But that long-term settlement shift really was coming about as a part, as I say, of long-term climatic change, social and economic changes, and shifts in the way people were farming their landscapes.
You may be wondering, why are we talking about farming? Well, you may have first heard Shelley Williams at the beginning of our episode, and one of our keen champers mentioned that St. Peter's Church in Wolfhampcote was built from wealth deriving from the wool trade. I wanted to speak to Alex to learn more about farming and what led to the desertion of communities such as these, now making them deserted medieval villages.
I could go on. The changes you see to landscape, you've already mentioned sheep as well. What you're seeing is sort of an international market in wool growing up. And obviously, if you're a landlord, you're going to be looking at the best way to make the most amount of money. And with a dwindling peasantry, and the offer of good money for producing wool, you're going to look to turn your landscape over to livestock. And that has an effect, certainly by the time you get to around about 1500 into the 1600s. Okay, that has a long-term effect on the character of the English landscape, and especially places like Warwickshire. If you could imagine in the Midlands there, you've got what we would call the old-fashioned, long-standing three-field system, where you'd have two of those large, big open fields under crops, and then that third field would be lying fallow for a year. You're resting that third field and lying it fallow. And those fields would be divided up into strips. So we talk about strip agriculture, ridge and furrow agriculture, and year on year, the peasantry would have their strips allotted to them, and they would work individual strips in different parts of the field. That whole system, really, certainly by the time we get to around about 1600, has changed and is changing. Those fields are now being divided up. So we're seeing the beginnings, really, of hedgerows being introduced. So that iconic landscape that we often look out on in the Midlands, one of a sort of patchwork quilt of hedgerows, is really sort of forming at around about this time. And of course, the reason you want hedgerows is because you're managing livestock. And what you want in some ways is a more agile agricultural system. So instead of everyone in the village being wedded to growing barley in one huge field, what you can do is divide that big field up, and you can grow a bit of barley in there. You can start to grow things like turnips as well, root crops. But you can also turn some of those fields back to grass and graze sheep. And by grazing sheep, obviously you make a lot of money at this time, but you also put some fertility back into the soil. So we see those changes, and that benefits many within society. But of course, there are those that lose out, because we also see the commons, the large stretches of land where people would have maybe had a goat or a cow. The commons are being divided up as well, and many sort of further down the social order in the peasantry would have been deprived of some of those opportunities. So it's a landscape, I think, of agricultural change that is reflecting in many ways a landscape of social change.
Thank you so much, Alex, for all of your time today. And unless there's anything else you would like to say to add to the podcast?
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm always happy to sit down with a cup of tea and chat historic farming. So thanks for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Good to know. Take care, Alex. Thank you so much.
You too. Bye.
I am currently waiting on the train platform at Long Buckby in Northamptonshire for my special guest for this episode. It is bustling with people, which surprises me for such a quaint small railway station. It is the nearest station, however, to Daventry, which is 4 miles away and serves those coming from London, like Matthew Green. Matthew!
Hey,
hello! I'm good, how are you doing?
I'm good, yeah,
I always
not
forget
too bad.
how tall you are.
I know, yeah, me too. I
And
feel like
how
I'm about
short I am.
to join the army today.
Why? Because of your duffel
and the
coat?
combat, yeah, because you were talking about like boots and
Brilliant.
being ready for the landscape.
Matthew is a historian and author of the very successful book Shadowlands. He takes readers on a lyrical and immersive journey through the forgotten towns and villages of British history. Through vivid descriptions and untold stories, Matthew brings to life 8 lost places that have been long forgotten but not erased from memory. During our drive to St. Peter's, Matthew tells me about his method.
Well, I don't want to know too much about a place before I go there, if that makes sense. Because if you know everything, if you become an expert upon it, then you're sort of almost looking at things to tick off, and it becomes an exercise in a sort of checkbox. You need to be surprised by the landscape. You need to have kind of chance discoveries. There needs to be an element of serendipity. And you also need to embrace the unknown and be challenged. So when I was looking for my lost cities and towns and villages, I would do a bit of research. I didn't just randomly walk in a direction and think, oh, I hope I run into a lost city, must be somewhere around here. I did kind of know where I was going, but then I would just always walk, never drove, sometimes cycled, sometimes sailed, and wander around, just record everything that came into my head, just into the kind of voice memo app, and then go back to the hotel room or whatever and transcribe it at night. And Some of it was like the champagne brightness, but not much. About kind of 10% of it ended up being salvageable, and then those would end up being the kind of travel-y bits in the book. Then I would go and research it to death and interweave it, but never quite losing that original freshness of the first encounter.
And half an hour later, Matthew and I are about to have our first encounter of our very own shadow church in Wolfhampcote. We are driving down a very narrow, gravelly road off the A45 from Daventry to Dunchurch. We take it in turns to jump out of the car and open as many gates as we need to. A big sign that we are looking after livestock and there are sheep in the area.
Do you want to go through, then I'll shut it again?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. There we go. Was it? Yes, okay. Yeah. Okay, so we can see the church in the distance. It's actually quite a sight to behold. It's got kind of beautiful, rusty, what look like Norman-esque windows. It's got a kind of fortress-like quality, but there's quite a presence. It's complete, and it doesn't look like it's sort of in a total kind of mangled state. But you can also see other fragments of ruins over there, and it's beautifully lit up with the kind of last luminous rays of the sun. All right, it looks beautiful.
But Matthew and I are also keen to find the site of the abandoned Wolfhampcote village, whilst we still have the autumnal evening light.
Right, I think this must be the track over to the canal. Well, this is the old canal before it was straightened, so yeah. Shall we embark upon the journey?
Let's do it, yeah.
We have found some clues to help us with our quest. We know St. Peter's Church is situated near the River Leam, which forms the boundary between the county and Northamptonshire. The church stands on its own between the embankments of the abandoned Great Railway and the London and North Western Railway too. And there is an abandoned railway bridge directly next to the church that you can find by going down this little overgrown track. And what's more, the village is near the Oxford Canal, which we pass on our drive down. Between the church and the canal lies the site of the abandoned village.
I've been looking forward to this little walk.
Yeah, it feels like, are we going to go under that abandoned
Railway bridge. I mean, when I said that it was in between the church and the railway, I didn't think it was like going to be in this field.
Yeah, right.
But I expected like a 15-minute walk. I didn't think it was going to be a big hike. So what are the key clues in the landscape, Matthew, that we should be looking out for?
I would say this is quite promising because it feels like it could be like the remainder of a path. It's sort of like hollowed out a little bit. So usually there'll be some kind of trackway, whether that's for humans or animals or both. I'd also expect to see, we'll know we're there because there's going to be hopefully some sort of stubs of structures. So you'd expect to see, the remnants of houses or other kind of buildings, and sometimes just weird kind of grooves in the earth, like sort of bumps and dips and grooves, which could be the first or even second floor of buildings sunken down. If it was a kind of place of pasture, then we need to figure out where they would have had the sheep grazing, and before that, which fields would have been tilled because the peasants got replaced by the sheep, I think, and you have all this imagery of man-eating sheep.
Okay, so perhaps if we go back on ourselves and then turn left towards the vicarage, we can find some of the old remains.
Yes.
But I do just love being out here.
Yeah.
It's so peaceful.
I mean, we could just walk that way in case it happens to be. We won't be walking for ages.
Eventually we'll find an abandoned village.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because people do expect, like, sometimes they expect to find kind of like dead bodies and like rats and like it's just been about, which of course you never do. And sometimes it's just a sort of sense of absence and open space, which is all that's left. But
Which way do you think we should go, Matthew?
I think, having heard what you've just said, I think that direction
Okay.
towards the kind of lightening sky.
I love
sky
that.
could be a hint.
Absolutely. So we're going to go back on ourselves slightly.
Yeah.
We're going to go back to the abandoned railway bridge, and then we're going to turn right. So I don't know my navigation. Which way is that? Is that
That's
west?
left.
So the altar of the church is in the east, so that would make this the west. Yeah.
The west.
The west way.
After walking through a rather mound-ridden field, we come across some ruins and the old manorial house, which tells us that we must be close. Despite its sad ending, the village of Wolfhampcote has a long and storied past. Its name is derived from Saxon words meaning Euthelm's manor, and records can be traced all the way back to 1086 in the Domesday Book, a testament to the strong community that once thrived here.
So yeah, this is promising, and you can see, it's still quite a presence on the horizon. The church, that is.
The church is usually at the centre of these communities, and as we've sort of come across this church, we've been surrounded by these undulating hills, by this gorgeous landscape, which is very up and down, but so textured. And I think that's what is the biggest clue, right? That it's all around us.
Yeah, it's completely. It's like a sort of moat of.
Do you see the fox?
That's something my eyesight
gosh.
didn't catch.
Oh, sorry, I just saw this big fluffy red tail, and there he is. I can see him over there.
There's actually two horses as well. No.
It is sort of staring at the horses. It's directly in front of me, and now it's just running off.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And his little head just jumping up and down.
Yeah.
Oh, he's just like running around at the end of the field. How sweet. Sorry, that was very distracting.
No, not at all. That's exactly the kind of thing that is worth getting distracted by.
The light is starting to dull, and we still haven't found any hard evidence of where the abandoned medieval village would have been, although Matthew suspects the large field opposite the church.
Hello there. Hi. We're just looking for a lost village. You haven't ever come across it, have you? You're local.
It's around here somewhere. I think it's basically, the church was in the centre of the village. If you look at if you look in that field, you can see, for example, the undulations where there obviously were, buildings and things. And I think it probably goes on into the further field, but you can especially see it in that field, and probably in this field as well.
Your hunch was right.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. I think I've proven myself right. The reason I think this is probably the core of the village, the lost village, is because if you look at the undulations in the landscape in these fields, they're like frozen waves. It's much more pronounced than I think you'll agree with any of the other fields that we've walked through. So that generally means that there were structures which have left the sort of load of centuries, and it's become imprinted on it. So you say if you were just to kind of try and roll across this, it would be kind of difficult. It's not remotely flat. It's also directly to the north of the church, and that would make sense because you wouldn't want the church too far away. Because the elderly people, the infirm, and when they had to bury bodies, not to make it too morbid, but they wouldn't have wanted to have to drag the bodies too far, particularly at the time of the Black Death. We'd probably find a plague pit at some point beneath that kind of halo of crows that we saw earlier. So it looks a bit like a kind of Colosseum, or like mini sort of I'm not saying it was, but it could be that there was some kind of structure, maybe a kind of wooden sort of mini castle in the middle bit, surrounded by water, and that could have been the keep of the village.
I really want to see this from the sky.
Yeah?
I think.
Well, I parked the plane just outside the church, so.
But then our trusty producer finds some hard-hitting evidence.
Oh gosh. And Leanne has just found some brilliant aerial photographs and just put them in my face.
These photographs can be found on Warwickshire's County Council's website and certainly show the site of Wolfhampcote's medieval deserted settlement. This is documentary evidence for its existence and abandonment by the 16th century. Aerial photographs from June 2007 suggest a moat, a hollow way, fish ponds, and buildings, which now appear to be a cross-hatching of wobbly geometric shapes from above.
Wow.
So we have definitely found it.
We have found it. Yay! This is confirmation.
Because sometimes you never find them. So this is pretty good going.
A 1955 archaeological investigation of the village revealed a rich history with traces of various occupations dating back to the Saxon period. However, it was during the 12th and 13th centuries that this once sleepy hamlet saw a surge in activity, flourishing with a population of around 100 people and even boasting its own priest. As the careful hands of archaeologists unearthed artefacts from the Middle Ages, such as delicate pottery pieces, intricate spindle hools, sharp knives, and ornate buttons, they were met with a puzzling sight. The once thriving village now lay in ruins, its buildings crumbling and its streets overgrown. Through further research, it became clear that a combination of factors led to the decline of Wolfhampcote. The worsening weather conditions made it increasingly difficult for villagers to farm the waterlogged soil, resulting in a slow decrease in population. To combat the constant rain, the villagers constructed a new layer of clay over their main street, complete with ditches on either side. But ultimately, it was the actions of two individuals that sealed the fate of this village. In 1501, John Ferrers enclosed 30 acres for his sheepfold, forcing 6 tenants to leave their homes. As if that wasn't enough, in 1510, Richard Cuny took on an additional 40 acres, displacing another 6 tenants. It was a heartbreaking realisation for those who called Wolfhampcote home.
Good. Let's go, yeah.
Oh, look at that, come in.
Here we go, wow. Well, beautifully stark, this side, isn't it?
It really is. It feels very spacious.
It's amazingly, like the lights from the sunset.
It almost feels so angelic.
It does, yeah. It feels like a transcendental moment.
The autumn sunlight was fading quickly. So we decided it was time to venture around St. Peter's and enjoy its shadowy interior. To give you a good idea of what the church is like, I've invited doctoral student Shelley Williams from Oxford University to give us a summary. Before coming to Oxford, Shelley taught history of art in the US and in 2021 moved to the UK with her husband and 4 children. Their favourite activity since moving here, hands down and no lies, is champing in medieval churches. Her kids love drinking hot chocolate in their sleeping bags, spotting foxes in the graveyard and the bats in the belfry, whilst the adults enjoy the sounds of an ancient building waking in the sunrise. Recently, Shelley has visited St. Peter's.
Hello, this is Shelley Williams, and my family and I are champing at St. Peter's Church in Wolfhampcote. One of the first things I noticed about this church are the lines. I don't think there is a single straight line in this church. From top to bottom, it's made of turning, tilting, sloping lines. This fabulous crown post roof has these wavy struts. It seems there are many times when this church was near demolition, but preserving this roof frame alone justifies its preservation. The wavy struts are echoed below with the twisted balusters holding up the communion rails, and it's all very elegant. And the pillars of the nave have also sunken a bit, so they too are leaning and shifting the pointed arches just a little. The whole effect is one of organic response to the environment, to the shifting water paths and rain and animals. It's a really, really wonderful little church.
So I see you're looking at the font, Matthew.
Yeah, well, this font stands apart from everything else in this church because it's actually from Norman times. It's the Domesday Book mentions a priest in Wolfhampcote, but only the font, which we're looking at now, it's literally in front of us, survives from that time. And it's got a kind of beautiful simplicity. The first thing I thought is that it looks like a kind of pestle like a pestle and mortar.
You're right, it really does, doesn't it? It's got that sort of very robust shape, but it's quite inside. When you peer inside, there's this great big hole in the centre.
I mean, it's over 1,000 years old, but it looks like it's been almost like freshly kind of made on a sort of potter's kiln,
absolutely,
like on the wheel. And
it's very smooth.
Yeah, and I really like it. It's not remotely kind of, you see very elaborate fonts in many churches. This has got a sort of basic simplicity to it, which is quite endearing. But the oldest part of the church, I understand, is beneath the tower, which dates from the 13th century, so a little later than this font. And we can see that over here.
Oh yes, absolutely. And we can also see that heraldry as well, which in this afternoon light is, it's beautiful. It's really visible.
And the bells are somewhere.
Absolutely. So we have one remaining bell cord here, which we can see, and so it ascends right up into this building.
And there's an amazing inscription. I believe the Langley family, they installed the great bell, and there's an inscription, which I guess must be up there. We can't actually see it at the moment, but in multis annis resone campania Johannes, which means, and I think this is quite evocative, may John's bell for many years resound. And we know it was cast in London around about 1450 by a man whose surname is unbelievable, John Sturdy.
That is brilliant.
Made these sturdy bells. And I found a man called John Death in a rental roll the other day, and he died in the black. I thought that was too good to be true, but John Sturdy with the bells. I'm quite tempted to give it a tug, but I don't know if the whole thing's going to come crashing through
Perhaps
the roof.
not.
In the afternoon light, again, there's a sort of wonderful simplicity. They're kind of crude and the base, austere, I think probably is the right word, but they do let in just the right amount of kind of golden light. And there's that little robin silhouetted against the plumes of light, and it's flying from window to window. It doesn't feel lifeless, does it? It feels like there's quite a lot of energy in here.
Absolutely. It's seen so much.
Yeah.
Many people are drawn to the Boathouse pub because of its idyllic canal-side location near Braunton Marina. You can watch the passing narrowboats and enjoy wholesome homemade food. And we've made it in time for the local quiz.
Oh, no, you've got it. Oh, you've got it.
In what year did the French Revolution begin?
The what? French Revolution begin.
In what year did the French Revolution begin?
We could be revisionists.
And in first stage with 1600 Autumn Rose.
Very contented with our jovial and delicious evening, we put on our coats and switch on our torches for the 15-minute walk back to St. Peter's in moonlight.
So we're walking home now. I love how I said that we're walking home to the church, home to the church, to the abandoned church. Can you hear that echo? I hope we can still hear the owl. I mean, it's very eerie, isn't it? How do you feel walking through the graveyard at 10 p.m. at night?
Strangely sort of calm, and it's not harrowing. It's amazing. Just look at the silhouette of that. Take a picture of that.
As we walk back, shrouded in darkness, we discuss how Wolfhampcote's association with dereliction, with abandonment, and a vanished community does automatically give this church a gothic, spooky feel. The wildlife feels closer here, as if nature is taking over. And it is rather easy to lean into this feeling of unease.
I think, an element of it is we don't have stained glass windows.
Yeah.
And I think as they're boarded up, maybe it provides this sort of derelict feel.
Yeah, it's got that slight, not like a prison, but I think you're totally right. But there's no glass.
No.
It's like this kind of brooding. And also
locked up.
the battlement, because there is a sort of like, almost like a watchtower.
But of
Yeah.
course, many enjoy feeling the sensation of being scared, feeling the rush of adrenaline when they even trespass into forgotten places that appear unloved and neglected by society. I pose this question to Matthew just as we pass by one of the ruins next to the church.
What do you think it is about exploring these abandoned and decaying structures, Matthew? Why do you think it's so popular?
Well, I mean, just look at this. There's a certain sort of beauty to that, the kind of decayed grandeur. And there's a sense, I think, of kind of man and nature working together. So you can see this sort of brick-built structure, and you know, in other abandoned buildings and churches. But there's like a tree sort of growing in it, almost growing through it, and it's being kind of reappropriated by nature, and it sort of brings into focus almost the hubris of thinking you can build a single structure, let alone a whole city, when you've got nature kind of broiling beneath, biding its time and ready to reclaim it. That's one reason. I think also it's philosophically they're quite profound because they're sort of emblems of transience and mortality. Not to get too sort of bleak about it, but like people find it quite cathartic to ruminate upon the ruins, as the Romantics put it, because it sort of brings your own sort of mortality, I suppose, into focus, but in a way that's cathartic rather than just. You very rarely find people that visit ruins like this and they're just really depressed afterwards. They're actually quite uplifted, and it's calm. You know, it's a sort of calming environment. I'm not quite sure what it is, but the French have a term called the nostalgie de la boue.
Nostalgie de la boue is a 19th century term that means quite literally nostalgia for the mud. It encapsulates a desire for degradation and depravity and essentially points to how beauty can be found in destruction. I feel really privileged and grateful that we are able to experience sleeping in such a special building overnight and safely. And it is all thanks to the church's Conservation Trust. Anyone can be an urban explorer, but of the Indiana Jones variety opposed to the Tasmanian Devil. But that isn't to say that St. Peter's hasn't seen vandalism, it hasn't seen this difficult negative side. In 2020, vandals broke in and damaged a 700-year-old pew. And indeed, it is a church that has refused to die. And just to add to this resilient image, I am treated to a private poetry reading with none other than our guest Matthew Green himself that encapsulates this durable theme.
Okay, so I just want to read a poem about a ruined Roman city, which I think is quite interesting because it was written in the 8th century, and the manuscript on which it's written is itself a ruin because half of it was burnt. So we've had to extrapolate quite a lot of this. But it describes a fallen city, and it says, "This masonry is wondrous, fates broke it, courtyard pavements were smashed, the work of giants are decaying. Roofs are fallen, ruinous towers, the frosty gate with frost on cement is ravaged. Chipped roofs are fallen, undermined by old age. The cold shoulder of the earth possesses the mighty builders, perished and fallen. The cold grasp of the earth, 100 generations of people have departed. Often this wall, lichen grey and stained with red, a bit like the church, experience one rain after another.
Oh gosh, that is like the church.
It is, isn't it? Remain standing under storms, the high wide gate has collapsed. Mud turned away, spirit puts together keen counsel to quick design in rings. Bright were the castle buildings, many the bathing halls, high the abundance of gables, great the noise of the multitude, many a mead hall full of festivity, until fate changed that. Far and wide the slain perished. Days of pestilence came. Death took all the brave men away. Their places of war became deserted places. The city decayed. The rebuilders perished. Armies to the earth. And so these buildings grow desolate, and this red-curved roof parts from its tiles of the ceiling vault. The ruin has fallen to the ground, broken into mounds, where at one time many a warrior, joyous and ornamented with gold-bright splendour, proud and flushed with wine and steam, shone in war trappings, looked at treasure, at silver, at precious stones, at wealth, at prosperity, at jewellery, at this bright castle of a broad kingdom. Final bit, the stone building stood, a stream threw up heat in wide surge, the wall enclosed all in its bright bosom where the baths were, hot in the heart. That was convenient, and now they rot. So, a bit morbid perhaps, but this is Bath. This is the ruins of Roman Bath, and in the 8th century, when it was just kind of decaying in the landscape, people thought it was a write-off, and that was it, a bit like how Anglo-Saxons would have seen Londinium. But then it goes to show that what seems to be a lost cause often isn't in the long run, because Bath is still there today.
Absolutely.
Just like London's still there.
Reimagined by future people and civilizations. That is so, it's so beautiful, but also whilst we're sitting here in the church in our pyjamas, getting ready for bed, I mean, there are so many correlations with the church, with, talking about the lichen outside and this sort of red hue that you have on the stone, but also when we're inside, we're looking around and it actually feels like an Anglo-Saxon hall in a way.
It feels a lot, I can imagine, the Anglo-Saxons with their mead and because it's beautifully lit with candles and everything around here. And
because as we were saying before, it's quite austere in here, isn't it? But I mean, it's quite minimalistic. It's just whitewashed walls. Yeah. You have the stone, but that's it. You don't have any pomp or glory.
No, not at all, no.
Or ornamentation. It's just very plain. Thank you for that. Thank you. I'll be going to sleep thinking of Anglo-Saxons.
Yeah. It's kind of
festivities.
Quite nice. The contrast in that, isn't it, between the what's left, which is almost nothing, and then they're in their heyday and they've won a battle and they're like drinking their mead and having their steam baths, and then it all like sinks into the earth until it's rebuilt.
Absolutely. And here we are enjoying this beautiful church, like centuries later.
Indeed, champing in it.
Champing, absolutely. Thank you for that. Well,
thank you.
With that in mind.
Yeah. Good night. Good night.
As I enjoy an early morning walk, I am captivated by the desolate landscape surrounding the Church of St. Peter at Wolfhampcote, which stands here defiantly against the tide of time. This ancient structure has withstood centuries of abandonment and neglect, its buttresses an ironclad reminder of a past that refuses to be forgotten. Its rugged windows, weathered by the wind and rain, glare out onto this barren land like eyes in a skull. And upon this rather macabre note, I wake myself up with an early morning quest.
Apparently the porch has a stone slab, which is possibly part of a child's coffin, set into its western wall outside. So I'm just this morning trying to find it. First thing as I've got up, let's have a look. I mean, there's lots of graffiti. 1936, I've just found one as I'm walking around on one of the arches. Oh, there it is. Oh, yes, I found it. Good morning, Matthew.
Good morning.
How did you sleep?
Really well, actually, which I wasn't sure was going to happen, but it's very quiet and the air's very clear, and it was almost pitch black, although we did have some glitzy lights on and candles. And
we did, which made it a bit more atmospheric.
Yeah,
a bit
less
scary.
Terrifying. Yeah. I went out in the middle of the night. That was quite terrifying.
Did you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was quite hard to get the door open, and I felt like a kind of someone seeking sanctuary in the Middle Ages and trying to flee without the priest noticing.
Me being the priest in this
exactly,
instance.
Yeah. And I was.
And you fumbling around in the dark. I didn't hear you, so you didn't wake the priest. Be reassured.
Well, I must have done if you heard me.
No, I didn't. I didn't.
Oh, you didn't hear me? Oh, I see, right.
I was completely asleep.
Right.
I didn't hear you at all. But it's funny, we went to sleep like thinking about Anglo-Saxon festivities, and I think I had a dream that I was back in the Anglo-Saxon period, you know, with a glass, with a kind of
like
mead.
a tankard of mead, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that kind of filtered into my dream as well somehow. Some kind of bacchanalian feast that was going on all night and was being forced to drink like something like that early in the morning, so...
And I mean, we've woken up and it's absolutely beautiful, isn't it? It's really bright. It's almost like a completely different interior. I mean, we have these gorgeous wooden beams. It is quite austere still, but you have this warmth, this glow from the sun.
Yeah, and it sort of matches the sort of pale gold or even sandy hue of these
the arches.
The arches are amazing. There's one opposite us, which is kind of pointed arch, like very like Norman style, and then just a kind of a window encased within it.
It's very picturesque, isn't it? Absolutely.
It sort of challenged my expectations of like an abandoned church, because most of the ones I've been to, like that were in the appropriated military zones and things like that, were just like riddled with bullet holes, and they were like half falling down, and the wind would howl through them. But this is very sort of contained, and as you say, it's the austerity that kind of indicates that it's kind of like fallen status.
If you would like to make some memories, why not give Champing a try? For everything you need to know about Champing, you can visit champing.co.uk. The Champing season happens in those warmer months between March and October, so make sure you get your place and book now. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. It has been an absolute pleasure. Nights in the Nave has been a podcast written and produced by me, Victoria Jenner. My guest has been today Dr. Matthew Green, and special thanks goes to Fiona Silk, who runs Champing, and our Champing assistants, Dr. Alex Langland, doctoral student, Shelley Williams and Lewis Cooper. Thank you to you all for being part of today's episode. Sound recording was managed by Leanne Beattie, editing by Jamie Reed Sound, music by Nick Ferry, and design by George Allen. Come to a sleepover at our place.